Well, hello. My name is Joseph Jordan, and I am the CEO of the North Carolina Professionals Health Program. And what I would like to do today is present to you an opportunity to perhaps have some understanding and some knowledge about recognizing substance abuse in your workforce. So I'm going to talk a lot about the use of substances. I'll use terms like chemical dependency, substance use disorder, alcoholism, addiction. What I'm talking about is the use of substances such as marijuana, cocaine, alcohol, opioids, other painkillers for people that use those in a way not prescribed for them. And that substance abuse will present in your workforce on occasion, and as a result could potentially affect your ability to provide good care and their ability to provide good care, because if you rely on the people in your workforce, as we all do, if they're abusing substances, you need to be able to recognize it and know what to do. So first things first, I'd like to say thank you to the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Board, the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Association, because they make the North Carolina Veterinary Health Program possible. And it is their ongoing support that allows this program and this presentation to occur. So I just want to give a shout out to those two organizations. And also, this is my yellow lab, Tanner, and I would like to say thank you from him. He is cared for by some wonderful veterinarians at the Rollsville Veterinary Hospital, and the technicians and veterinarians there do a wonderful job, and so I'd like to say thank you to them while I'm doing this presentation. So, on with the presentation. Now, the first thing I'd like to talk about is you have probably heard about the prescription opioid epidemic. And I have up on the screen here a information about, do veterinarians have a dog in the fight? Now, all puns aside, one would have to wonder whether the fact that veterinarians who prescribe opioids in the course of their practice, do they have any role in our current opioid epidemic? And for 2016, there were 42,000 deaths and over 1,000 emergency room visits daily. So that means every day in America, there were 1,000 ER visits in regards to opioid overdoses or opioid treatment. That's a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of tragedy in regards to persons that are abusing opioids and end up in danger of possibly dying as a result. So one thing we do know, well, for a fact, is that veterinarians prescribe synthetic opioids, such as, well, in fact, one of the stories that I've heard recently is that people are beginning to run across carfentanil, which is a potent um, uh, preparation of fentanyl used to tranquilize elephants. So potent that it can end up killing someone very quickly, and there's not a lot that can be done about it. And the only people who prescribe that particular medication are veterinarians. So there are other synthetic opioids prescribed by veterinarians, but that's one in particular that is of significant concern. So the authors of this American Journal of Public Health thought, well, if we want to know if veterinarians have a role in this, we need to get a bunch of veterinarians together. And so they convened a focus group of veterinarians. Focus group means they got together a group of people in a particular area of expertise. That's what a focus group is, and they literally focus in on one particular issue. And so once they got this group together, they did a 24-item online survey. Just to get their perspective. That's what you do with a focus group. You know, people use focus groups for product development, such as cars or other things. You know, how does this car look to you? Do you like the color? Do you like the wheels? Do you like the tires? This was a focus group to get people's perceptions of abuse and misuse of opioids by animal owners. So I'm back for this slide. And what I would say is that when they did do this focus group and they surveyed 189 Colorado veterinarians, this is what they look like. This is what the focus group was comprised of. 64% female. Over three-quarters were 40 years of age or older. And the actual time in practice average was about 22 years. Half in a suburban setting, and almost three-quarters were practicing small animal care. I would guess that this represents Colorado pretty well. I think here in North Carolina, probably there's more in suburban and urban settings than in this particular focus group. Now, what is really concerning about this survey is the information I'm about to share with you, and that is that 13%, which means about 20 to 25 of these surveyed vets were aware that an animal owner had intentionally made an animal ill, injured an animal, or made an animal seem ill or injured in order to obtain opioid medications. So this is a situation that a pet owner abused, there's no other word for it, abused their pet in order to obtain medications. Now, there is a story out there, you can find it on the internet, that really points to the level of desperation that people with opioid addiction can experience. And a woman that used a razor to cut her golden retriever at least 2 times, maybe 3, in order to obtain pain medications for the dog, and was eventually found out and prosecuted, which I'm personally amazed by, but at the same time I understand. As someone that has worked in the field of substance use disorders for a bit of time, I have heard stories about people cutting themselves or injuring themselves to get medications. So it's not particularly surprising to me that someone would injure an animal, even an animal they love, in order to obtain the medications that they are craving. Addiction is a horrible illness. It affects people's ability to think clearly and rationally. And so I could understand in a way how someone might be driven to do this. Now, in addition, in this survey of about 190 vets, 44%, so that's going to be right around 80, were aware of opioid abuse or misuse by either a client or a veterinary practice staff member. So, and within that 44%, 12% were aware that it was a veterinary staff that did opioid abuse or diversion. So now sometimes people, and this is one of the things to think about when you're thinking about your staff, sometimes people will divert medications in order to sell them or in order to use for themselves, but also to use for a family member or to get for a family member. Not everybody that diverts medications is using those medications. So there are times in which there will be missing medication stock, but what that will reflect is somebody that is obtaining those medications to either sell them or to give to a family member or friend or loved one. So, what did this survey find? Now that we have talked a little bit about who was in the survey and what their belief was around opioid abuse and misuse. So, over half, 62% actually felt that they had a role in preventing opioid abuse and misuse. But really interestingly, only 40%, or actually 40%, were unsure if opioid abuse or misuse was a problem in their community, which is a little odd that over 60% felt they had a role in preventing opioid abuse or misuse, but 40% were unsure if it was a problem in their immediate area. I would guess that these are individuals that, for one reason or another, are not wanting to admit there's a problem. Denial is a powerful thing, and certainly could lead to people being unwilling to admit that opioid abuse and misuse is a problem right around them. I think it would be very difficult for someone to reasonably, I'm going to adjust the camera here, to reasonably say that there's not an opioid problem in their immediate vicinity these days. Now, what led, I think, to people thinking about offering trainings like the ones that you're watching and engaging in is that 3/4 of the participants in this survey said their veterinary medical school training on opioid abuse or misuse was either fair, which means it was okay, poor, which means it was pretty bad, or absent completely. So it'd be interesting to break that 73% down and see, well, was it completely absent? You know, was that, of that 73%, was that half of them where they didn't have any at all? But that did not happen. But we know at least 3/4 of them said, look, it was either okay, pretty bad, or none at all. And remember, these are people that have been in practice an average of 22 years. 64% of them said they had not completed any continuing education on best practices for prescribing opioids since entering practice. Now, part of the reason that I think veterinarians are being looked at or asked about this issue or educated about this issue is diversion of opioids from legitimate prescriptions is one of the primary means whereby people obtain opioids illegally. So to break that down, one of the primary ways that people get drugs on the street is when they get those drugs from somebody that has a valid prescription for them. So because we know that veterinarians write prescriptions every day for medications, and that a certain percentage of those are going to be for painkiller medications because people take their dogs or cats or other animals to the vet when they're injured, it's reasonable to assume that there's going to be prescribed painkillers, some of which are going to be opioid type. In fact, I'd say a large amount are, and those can be diverted. So it seems to me there should be some continuing education on best practices for that, given the opioid epidemic we have going on. But 64% of the vets in this survey said they had no continuing education. And when they were asked about that continuing education, what were the priorities? Over 80%, specifically 81%, said we need to know about opioid abuse prevention. 55% said we need some pain management guidelines. We need to know how to manage the pain of animals in a way that we're not going to be likely to have those medications diverted by clients. And about the same amount, 54% said, hey, how do we engage these electronic resources to help prevent opioid abuse and misuse? And when we say electronic resources, what we're referencing is a prescription drug monitoring program. Almost every state in the union at this point has a program, a computer program that is maintained by the state that monitors and keeps track of medications of a controlled nature that are written in that state. And that's called a prescription drug monitoring program. And you can see here on this last bullet point where it talks about a PDMP. That's what it's talking about. And they said more than a third, 36%, said they needed help and asked that they get improved guidelines and improved tutorials to help them access the electronic resources that they have available to them, that 54% that said that was an educational priority. So now we'll move on to the next slide. So there were three main recommendations that the authors of this article shared. One was that there be increased tracking and surveillance for our opioid medications. And this would be done through two means: through a state prescription monitoring system, similar to the one that is now used in North Carolina, called the North Carolina Controlled Substance Reporting Database, and that there be enhanced workplace policies. Now I'm going to go a little tangential here from this slide and let you know that the North Carolina Professionals Health Program has a workplace policy boilerplate that I'm able to share with those who would like to use it. It's fairly extensive. It has letters that go out to people. It has policies and procedures. It's done in Word, so you could utilize this workplace policy for a drug-free workplace at your leisure. Just two things. One, I would highly suggest that if you do ask me for this workplace policy and I share it with you, and I'll put this in any email that I send out to someone, that you consult with an employment attorney and that you make sure and apply that workplace policy fairly and across every employee. Policies are only as good as the people that enforce them. And so if you do decide to enhance your workplace policy, consult with an attorney and also consult with a substance use disorder professional. And if you're in the state of North Carolina, or maybe even in other states, you can contact me and I will be happy to provide you the name of someone that could potentially assist you in this process. Now, there was the second recommendation was for increased awareness and education among veterinarians in regards to the opioid prescribing and also how to recognize and intervene, which is what I hope you will get from the second part of this presentation, where we start talking about signs and symptoms of substance use disorders in a variety of different areas. And then lastly, of the three main recommendations, research. And what they meant by this was having a systems analysis to examine and track opioid prescribing. And I believe that is within a practice. So as a veterinary practice, you would track who is writing controlled substance medications or opioid medications and examine that. See if there's someone that's writing more, see if there's ways that those conditions can be treated by non-opioid measures. And then finally, have a way to identify and evaluate best practices for veterinarians in regards to prescribing and pain management. These were things that were discussed in an earlier slide. So on to the next slide now. So this is the vignette number 2, which has to do with, again, recognizing substance abuse in your workforce. So as a partner in a large practice with multiple veterinarians, you've rotated in as the practice president. And after a drug representative dinner, one of the techs comes to you and is highly concerned about one of the veterinarians that's in the practice. Says that she was inappropriate with him after the dinner, said some things that really made him uncomfortable, and then drove home after the dinner when she was clearly impaired. Now, your approach to this is to go speak to her immediately. She becomes highly insulted, quite defensive and angry, says the tech was inappropriate with her, not that she was inappropriate with him, and asks that you not bring it up again. And so then you go talk with one of your partners because this is a difficult situation. And interestingly, that partner makes the comment that she thinks, this is probably not the first time this has happened, but it may be just the first time that somebody has said something. And so a situation like this, what do you think you would do? And tell you what I'm going to ask you to do is think about these two vignettes and maybe think about what you would do if you had to deal with one of these. And just think about that for a second. Well, if you've thought about it for a second, now is the time that we are going to talk about the signs and symptoms of addiction or substance use disorder, chemical dependency, alcoholism. And these signs and symptoms are set up in a particular way. We're going to start with, I don't know if you can see my hands here, but if I was live, way up at the top of the stuff that you might see in the beginning, and then as the addiction and the disease gets more and more progressed, you will see more of these symptoms. Now, before we get into these, I want to do something that's very important. I want you to be very careful about making a generalization or some assumptions about what addiction is or is not from one or two symptoms. It is important that you realize that these symptoms are going to occur in a cluster. They're not going to occur one or two and have an indication that there's a substance use disorder. I think this is called anchoring or preconceived notions. There's lots of names for it, but basically it means you see one or two of these things and think, oh, that person has a substance use disorder. That may not be the case. There's other explanations as to why someone might be experiencing any of these signs or symptoms. But if you put enough of these together, then it does say something's going on. And so, on to signs and symptoms of a substance use disorder, or as the title says, addiction. So, first let's start with the community. So, as someone begins to develop a substance use disorder, what you will see is that they will begin to withdraw from their previous peer group. They'll start to withdraw from their coworkers. They will start to show a tendency to not engage in as much social interaction. And when they do engage in that social interaction, what you will see as the hallmark of their relationship to the community is a unpredictability and unreliability when they go to these community events. So this will play out with embarrassing behavior at parties or get-togethers. This person will drink too much. They may arrive already under the influence. You may notice that they do not seem to have a sense of control about their behavior. One of the legal ramifications of this is within their community, they will have a DWI. And they may even have some other legal problems, but certainly a driving while impaired arrest or something along those lines, whether it's from alcohol or drugs, will certainly indicate that there may be a problem. Now, I want to say that, one DWI only indicates a substance use problem about a third of the time. Now, if someone gets two DWIs, that will indicate that there's a problem about 2/3 of the time. And so with three or more, we start getting into almost an assurance that the person has an issue with substances. So within the community, if you had to think of a kind of a single description, is unpredictable. You cannot count on that person will have appropriate and predictable behavior within the community. So uh, next slide. So in regards to employment, this is something that shows up as the person begins to have their substance use disorder starts to affect their ability to work as well as they once did. So you may notice numerous job changes where someone is changing jobs both within the organization, but most normally it means going from place to place to place. And sometimes that's also accompanied with frequent geographic relocations where the person will move, say, to the beach or back to the mountains or something along those lines where what we call the geographic cure. And this is when someone begins to think or has the idea that, well, if I move to fill in the blank, things will be better because the problem is this area that I live in. Well, that's not the case. The problem is the person, and when they move, they take that problem with themselves. You will also see unexplained intervals between jobs. This can be one of two things. It can be because the person is, in fact, in treatment for a period of time, maybe in jail for a period of time, or it may be that they just quit work and use or drink for a while. So that can also create some difficulties. You may see indefinite or inappropriate references. So the person will have references that you're not able to get a hold of. Another thing that you may run into is that the person will be overqualified for their job. And they may in fact have a set of skills or some experience that makes you wonder, why would this person be interested in taking this job? Now, there's one of two reasons. One is because they may have made the conscious decision that they want to work a job which doesn't require as much from them. I have seen people with substance use disorders that because they knew their substance use disorder would make them unreliable or not able to perform as well, would either consciously or unconsciously make the decision to be underemployed, so to speak, which is also being overqualified for a job, so that their substance use disorder doesn't get in the way of that job. You'll sometimes see people work less hours or may even work part-time. And then finally, or not finally, but also if there's a reluctance to let their family be involved in their employment, like you never hear about their family or never see their family come around, that can be an indicator. And then also, this is a dead giveaway. If someone is reluctant to do a pre-employment physical exam, and that would include, of course, a random urine drug screen, that should be an immediate red flag. That should be an immediate issue for you as the employer to say that there may be something going on here. Now, some people have some issues around this. They feel like it's an invasion of privacy. And we're going to talk later about the use of the urine drug screen as a way of determining whether someone can be trusted to be in a position of importance in an organization. But I think using a urine drug screen is very important, and I think it should be applied fairly and equally, and we will talk about that later on in this presentation. So this slide talks about the effects of the person having a substance use disorder on the family. Now, you will probably remember that on the previous slide in regards to employment or occupation, that there may be some reluctance for the person to allow their family to be involved in the workplace or come visit them or take part in social activities involving family, things like that. So what we begin to see at this point, and remember, I talked about how there's these kind of broad areas where things are having an effect. And as the person's substance use disorder becomes more and more of an issue, I'm trying to get on the screen here, their life gets more and more narrow and more are they unable to engage in the behaviors of a normal life. So within the family, they start to withdraw from family activities. There are unexplained absences from home. This is because the person may be out using drugs or drinking and not want to come home and deal with any potential conflict about that. There will be fights and arguments between the two adults, but there will also occasionally, because of the effect of substances on someone's ability to self-regulate. There may even be child abuse. This is quite a problematic thing. We see that within domestic violence, approximately 90% to 95% of the time, there is some intoxicating or affecting substance. And within child abuse, we also see very high rates that the abuser may have consumed alcohol or be under the influence of another substance. Interestingly, one of the first effects of alcohol is disinhibition. And so it makes sense, unfortunately, that if someone's drinking or using drugs, that they will be more likely to engage in a physical altercation with their spouse or loved one, as well as to be more likely to physically harm their child. Conversely, we also see what's called inappropriate caretaking by a spouse. So the classic is if one of the spouses goes out and drinks the night before and is very hungover and unable to go to work the next day, the spouse will call work and say that they have a stomach virus or something like that where they're not able to go to work. It becomes caretaking behavior. One spouse has to bring their behavior up in order to deal with the other spouse's behavior that's taking them down. We also see abnormal and antisocial and illegal behavior by children. Children start to act out the negative experience that they are having in their family when a parent is drinking or using and is unable to perform there. And then finally, with the use of alcohol and drugs, it's extremely common to see things such as separation, divorce, extramarital affairs, and lots of other dynamics that indicate the family is starting to disintegrate. I heard someone say one time that alcohol is a great solvent. It dissolves families, jobs, and people's lives. So, on to the next slide. So as the disease continues to progress, we start to see even more radical effects of the substance use disorder. One of the things about a substance use disorder, alcoholism addiction, is that it is, while it's also a primary illness, and that means that from that problem, lots of other issues develop. For example, people will have marital problems, they'll have financial problems, they'll have legal problems, all of which can be traced back to the problem with drugs and alcohol. Uh, they're not going to be able to deal with those legal issues if they continue to use drugs and alcohol. They're not going to be able to deal with those employment issues if they continue to use drugs and alcohol, and so on. So here, I'm going to describe some of the physical and emotional effects of someone having a substance use disorder. And again, you will see these within the workplace. You'll start to see a deterioration in their hygiene, in their clothing and dressing habits. You may notice that they have a number of physical complaints and issues with feeling sick often or even having injuries. They may take numerous medications and frequently visit the physician or dentist, urgent cares, any other type of medical provider, even emergency rooms, in order to obtain medications. You will also, or my experience has been that when people are working and have a active substance use disorder, they're more likely to have an accident at work. And this can be because they're under the influence or because they are coming off of something and it's affecting their balance and their ability to function normally. And then finally, with a substance use disorder, such addiction, alcoholism, people are prone to have emotional crises over time. And this is because their use of the drugs and alcohol precipitates ongoing problems within their family, within their life. And because the person's using drugs and alcohol, they're not able to handle their emotions as well as someone who is not using drugs and alcohol. And so that oftentimes things will build up and there will be an ongoing emotional turmoil in their life. And so we're now going to talk some about the office, which is a little bit different than, say, when the person is just trying to get employed somewhere. This is actually what I would expect for most of the people watching this. You will see these behaviors within the office by one of your coworkers or one of your colleagues, so to speak. So one of the main things that we talk about is kind of a hostile, withdrawn, and unreasonable behavior to office staff and to clients. The person's behavior does not match up with the situation. They become angry quite easily. They will not engage in conversation. We call this also the closed door phenomenon, where they would go into their office, close the door, and not interact with people, eating lunch by themselves, just basically removing themselves from the social atmosphere that is work. You will also more than likely see some complaints by clients about the person's behavior. I can remember a situation where a veterinarian called me, and one of her colleagues had been talking to the owners of some pets, and the pets had been prescribed a medication, a controlled substance, that the owners did not like the effect of the pets. And the veterinarian actually said, "Well, you know, I can take those for you. You can just leave those here." They had not brought the medications in, and the veterinarian actually said, "Well, I will come pick them up if you need me to. I know that's difficult for you to get rid of those." And the clients were concerned, and they made a complaint about this behavior to the managing veterinarian, the president of the practice. Also, there was a situation in which a veterinarian had missed a diagnosis a couple of times, and that was another complaint. Now, we don't see the next one as often. The next behavior is abuse of animals. But again, this is similar to what we talked about when we were talking about the family. If someone's under the influence, they're less likely to be in control of their behavior. They will act out much more easily. And so you may occasionally see some abusive behavior against animals by the veterinarian. And then I'm going to adjust the camera here. Abnormal sedation. Now this is where we have a situation where someone is pulling out more medications to sedate animals than they normally would. They may misjudge and use too much, or you may see a situation in which an animal comes out of sedation much more quickly than you would expect. And this can be a number of different causes for this. One would be that the person didn't administer as much medication as they said they did. So fentanyl or remifentanil or one of the other anesthetic type agents, not anesthetic, but sleeping agents that are used in order to put animals under and become unconscious. They may have diluted it, or they may not give as much. So you'll see an abnormal sedation of animals during surgery. They'll come out too quick. And then always, if someone seems to be unduly concerned or paying a lot of attention to controlled substances, this is something that's going to be a red flag for you. And remember, I talked about these red flags in the other areas, and you start seeing clusters of behavior. For example, the next one, where they're absent from the office for unexplained or frequent illnesses, what we kind of a little jokingly call absenteus Mondaeus or Fridaeus earlius. People are often drinking and using on weekends, and sometimes Monday comes around so quick that they're not recovered enough to come to work. Or on Friday, they really are looking forward to and anticipating their use of alcohol or other drugs, and so they will try to get out of work early on a Friday. And then finally, this last one, which is a little interesting, coming in on days off. You might not see that as a warning sign. But one of the things that I have observed over the 12 years that I've been working with veterinarians and vet techs is if someone comes in on their day off just to help out, they're very well aware that there's a number of people there already. And so this may give them an opportunity to divert medications or obtain medications that they would not otherwise have. Now, that could be because everybody is there and they're taking care of stuff, and so they're just kind of hanging out. Or people will come in for that express purpose because they know there's drugs there and they know they have access to them. And here we're talking about some fairly obvious signs. If someone has alcohol in their breath or the smell of alcohol about their person, they need to be pulled out of service. By that I mean they need to stop taking care of animals in any way, and they need to do a breathalyzer or be sent to get a urine drug screen that screens for the presence of alcohol. And this is for their protection as well. We have had situations where people had used a mouthwash like Listerine that actually has a fair amount of alcohol in it. And as a result, that smell was coming off and people thought they were drinking. So having them do a breathalyzer and get a urine drug screen actually proved they had not been drinking, that it was something else. So it actually is a good thing for them as well. If you run into some resistance and the person refuses to provide a breath sample or refuses to get a urine drug screen for the presence of alcohol, then you need to consider taking immediate action for that person to not put any animals in danger. If someone's having trouble walking, i.e. gait problems, this may be due to the effect of alcohol. It may also be due to the effect of TIA, transient ischemic attack, or other mini stroke. So anytime there's gait problems or slurred speech, you want to investigate those. And one of the questions you're going to ask people is, when did this happen, of course, and we've noticed this. Are you noticing this? Are you aware of this? If these things are fairly obvious and someone denies them, that would indicate that there is something going on with them that they do not want people to know about. And then finally, track marks, which are the bruises that are left when people inject drugs into their veins. If someone has track marks, this is a very obvious sign their addiction has progressed to a very intense level, and obviously something needs to be done at that point. So to kind of wrap up signs and symptoms, I have come up with this acronym called SAR. And this was something that was taught to me very early in my training from one of my supervisors that was from the eastern part of the state. And SAR stands for something ain't right. Now, it's a bit of a joke, but it really does say that you know this person, you've been around them, you've spent time with them, you understand them at least some. Now, if it's a new employee, obviously not, but if it's someone you've known for a while, you may see these changes to the negative and see that there's no discernible reason. Now, if someone's going through a marital issue, or they've had a parent pass away, or some other type of extremely stressful event has occurred in their life, and which sometimes could be something like a child going away to college that they're very close to, or maybe their parents or their best friend had to move away. Who knows? But there's a discernible source for their problems, and then there's a non are not immediately discernible. So if there's really no reason as to why this person has changed so and has really started to display some of the symptom behaviors that we talked about on previous slides, and there's something not right. Your gut instinct is telling you something's going on here. I would pay attention to that. I really would. So now we're going to look at some general principles about alcohol and drug use problems, talking about the difference between being sick versus impaired. I'm going to show you a chart called the Jellinek chart. This has been around for a long time, and talk about the different signs and symptoms that can be seen as someone progresses in their illness. And then I'm going to talk some about random urine drug screens, how those can create an opportunity for you to help someone, and what type and extent of those. What do you do with a negative, and then what do you do with a positive? So moving along here. So the general principles that I want people to understand is just because someone is sick with this illness doesn't mean that they will be impaired, doesn't mean that you will find them impaired in the workplace or in those other areas. However, well, let me back up here. That impairment over time will start to show up. There's no way that someone can be impaired with a substance use illness and not over time start to have that show up in the workplace, and have it show up in their relationships, and have it show up in their behavior. So one of the other things I would say is, when someone is sick, it doesn't mean that they're bad. We have an issue in our culture where we seem to think that a substance use behavior means they're a bad person. And the easiest place that we can identify as this happening is in the legal system. I've heard as much as 80% of the prison population is there because of substance use related offenses, dealing drugs, buying drugs, selling drugs, being impaired by drugs, that when they committed their crime they were under the influence. All of those things are punished as bad behavior, when in fact it is a symptom of that person being sick with the illness of substance use disorders. And in fact, they've shown that when people get treatment, when they are incarcerated, they are much, much less likely to be rearrested, even with all the difficulties that they face getting out of prison. Now, one thing I will say, the bad behavior that comes from being impaired, that comes from having an illness that affects somebody's ability to think clearly, does and often does lead to consequences. And that can be work, social, or legal consequences. So early on, when someone has an illness, there will be some slight impairment as a result of their substance use disorder. This is what is commonly referred to as, say, the functional alcoholic or functional drug addict. They're ill, they have the illness of substance use disorder, but the impairment that comes along with that has really not gotten that big. So they're able to go to work, they're able to go to school, they're able to function pretty well. However, as the illness gets bigger, so does the impairment. And soon this overlap between the two of them is much larger. Now, for medical boards and other regulatory agencies like the Veterinary Medical Board, this is where they have to get involved. is because as someone's illness increases and the impairment increases, then they will start to engage in unprofessional conduct. Sorry about that. I accidentally clicked. Let me just say that that unprofessional conduct is the purview of the boards such as the medical board, the pharmacy board, or the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Board, or for that matter, the bar, North Carolina State Bar has a lawyer's recovery program. The dental board has a dental recovery program. All of these boards have decided that it is better to help someone recover than to just punish them for having an illness. So this is the Jellinek curve that I told you about. And as you can see, the first thing up here says occasional relief drinking. Now that would be someone that every so often will consume some alcohol or do some drugs to help them just kind of feel some relief. And there's probably a fair amount of people in our culture that do that. But if they continue to do that and they continue to use drinking or alcohol or drugs as a way to deal with situations, deal with needing to de-stress or overcome some anxiety, that will lead to more and more problems. And you'll see here like onset of some blackouts, feelings of guilt, promises and resolutions fail when they say they're going to stop drinking. And we're starting to get into that crucial, critical phase of developing a problem where there really is no turning back. And here it says tries geographic escapes. I referenced that earlier in the presentation where I talked about people trying to do a geographic cure. And then unreasonable resentments. They start up here, starting to have some tolerance increase right here, increase in alcohol tolerance. Well, towards the very end, they start to have a decrease where people get intoxicated really easily. And then down through here is when, you know, all alibis are exhausted, there's complete defeat, the person just doesn't have any hope. Now, notice here, if the person has a desire for help, and they learn that alcoholism or addiction is an illness and can be arrested, can be stopped, then they can start up this process. And that is what the physician or the professionals health program, that is what we as professional assistance programs like NCPHP or other programs, what we try to do is help people see that these things are possible for them, that they can get back into a good, healthy, productive lifestyle that does not include alcohol. And you can see that, you know, towards the end here, they have contentment and they're confident. They face things with courage and have a new circle of stable friends. All these things can happen. This is the addiction side. This is the recovery side. And I would encourage you to look up the Jellinek curve. It's an excellent resource for you to see what can happen. And there's lots of different versions of this. So feel free to look on the internet and find them. Now, I need to talk about the urine drug screen. And I just want to point out that this is a large part of our culture. You can see here Elaine Bennis. This was a image that I got off of the internet where she's holding a cup up, where she's obviously been asked to provide a urine sample. And interestingly, if you went and Googled how to pass a drug test, which I don't suggest you do at work, and if you do it at home, you might want to explain why, you will get somewhere in the neighborhood of 212 million results in 0.66 seconds, which tells you this is a very popular search because people that are using do not want to get caught, which is why I recommend that you have pre-employment and inter-employment screening as a way to avoid people being able to use drugs freely and to get people help. I do want to say this about urine drug screens. They have to apply to everyone, and they have to be enforced fairly and evenly. The thing about a urine drug screen policy is it's not designed to catch people. Well, it does catch people, but that's not the point. The point is to identify when people have an illness and help them get some assistance for that illness, help them get treatment. Um, if you fire everyone that has a positive drug screen, you're going to end up losing some really good employees. So, how do you do this? I talked earlier about the fact that I had a boilerplate drug-free workplace policy document that I could get to you. That would be one way to do this. Make sure that you do it on a random basis if you're doing inter-employment screening. You can also do for calls. I talked with a veterinarian who, anytime there was any missing controlled substance stock, everybody that was on that shift went and had a urine drug screen done. And really it was to protect them so that there would be no cloud of suspicion. Some people choose to, if there's an accident of some type, to have the person do a drug screen. And then other people, obviously, or actually everyone, I hope, if someone's impaired in the workplace, you would have that person screened. Now, if we were so inclined, we could look on YouTube. And I would encourage, if you're watching this, to click on either one of these two links. And you will see that people have come up with a lot of ways to get around drug screens. And that includes doing everything from drinking something to somehow mask the results when they go to the bathroom, to having fake urine in a heated pouch, which is this second one. So I say you should arrange to have an observed drug screen. I'm sorry that keeps happening. Um, and make sure that the lab that you're using is reputable. I don't agree with the use of dipsticks. The things that you can get at Walgreens or Kmart or Walmart or any of the places, the incidence of false positive is just too high. So, if you think there may be a problem, now what do you do? Well, that would be a different presentation, and I'm happy to put that up at some point or present to you. But for right now, there are 5 questions. And what I want you to do is read through these questions, record your answers, and then if you go back to the web page where this was posted, you will find a certificate where you can fill in those answers. And you could submit that to the North Carolina Veterinary Medical Board when you submit your training hours. And this activity is good for 1 hour of continuing education or continuing medical education, whatever you want to call it. So there's the first question, and there's the second question. You should be able to scroll back and forth through this PowerPoint. But the first one is SAR stands for, and then you can look and see what that is. The second one is a driving while impaired charge means, and you should read through that. I'm going to pause here and give you plenty of time to look through these. Now, the next questions are 3, 4, and 5. There's only 5. What reason would you give a urine drug screen to an employee? That's the third one. Number 4 is one of the following is not a sign of office-based addiction. And number 5, all of the following are discussed signs of employment-based addiction symptoms except